Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of On the Border with Sheriff Lamb. I'm your host today, and this is being brought to you by FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform. You know, I feel very blessed because we just seem to get one good guest after another good guest. Our guest today is Congressman Tom Tiffany, and we actually have become friends over the last several years. I think right after you took office in 2020, Tom took the time to come down, and not just once, but many times you've taken the time to come down to the border, and we're going to get into all that today and see it for himself. He is the congressman for the 7th Congressional District in Wisconsin. And I'm going to read these committees because I don't want to get them wrong. You sit on the committee, the Judiciary Committee, where you're on the subcommittee on crime and federal government. Sometimes it's the same thing. I'm just kidding. And surveillance and immigration integrity, security and enforcement.
Yeah.
So Tom, thank you so much for being here, Congressman.
It is great to be here. It's great to be here, Mark. Yeah, it was the first trip that I took. I came in a special election, May of 2020, early June. We were down to the southern border, and we were so fortunate to be able to hook up with you and be able to see what was happening down on the southern border. I'll never forget going out in the desert and seeing the trash and garbage strewn everywhere, and the stories that you told. I've just told people, you know, you see some of the stories out there, but until you experience it and go to the border, you don't know what has been going on down there. And isn't it great to see the border coming under control once again?
It is fantastic. And I love that you have taken the time, because we have too many legislators in Washington, D.C. that vote on bills and never have actually taken the time to understand what it deals with. You came down there, and then after that, I was fortunate enough to come up into your neck of the woods, up into St. Croix, Wisconsin, and then we just went across the state. And I remember when we came up there with you, we were going from sheriff's office to sheriff's office. I don't know if you remember this, and we were talking about fentanyl. And at that point, it was still really new to a lot of the sheriffs back in Wisconsin. And I was telling them, hey, buckle up, because this is coming your way. I can't thank you enough for that opportunity. I talk about it all the time about what a great opportunity that was to visit sheriffs across the state, or at least your district in Wisconsin.
Well, those sheriffs still talk about you coming on up and visiting with them, and they really appreciated it. But what was great is a couple of those sheriffs then took the opportunity when we went down to the border on one of our trips later on. They came along with us. They got to see it firsthand, and it was a great experience for them, and they still talk about that. But you're right. It was the leading edge of the fentanyl crisis that was just beginning to ramp up. And, you know, that's where we came up with the saying, every state is a border state, because our sheriffs were talking about, in my home county, number one killer, young people, fentanyl in far northern Wisconsin. You almost can't get any further from the southern border than that. And here it is, the number one killer of young people. So people have seen the carnage that has happened as a result of this, and we really appreciate you spreading the word. And, you know, that election on November 5th, this may have been the number one issue that turned this for President Trump, and we are seeing results now.
I love the results we're seeing, and I know I'm going to ask you about a few of those results because I want to get your opinion on what you see from a congressional side of it. I want to just talk real quick about your congressional district. You get in 2020, clearly at the end of the last Trump administration. Now you're jumping in, and you have the full 4 years of this last administration. What did you see different in your district or in Wisconsin? Because people might say, well, that's not on the border. What did you see over the last 4 years? We talk about the fentanyl. Did you see a huge increase in the humans being trafficked there? What has really kind of continued to push that drive forward to be a champion for border security?
Yeah, so after I'd made like my second trip, that was in 2020, down to the border, there were people that were grumbling in the district that were saying, why are you down on the border? Why are you spending so much time down there? Well, it's very clear why I was spending time down there. And but you see the damage in so many ways. We just talked about fentanyl, but I just testified today or spoke in regards to a bill that passed through the Judiciary Committee today in regards to if you commit a drunk driving offense and you're a illegal alien, you will now be deported. And it's stuff like that that should have been done years ago.
Yes,
But
thank you.
we had a log truck driver from my district that got killed by a repeat offense illegal alien that was drunk driving. He blew a .176. You know how bad that is. And killed a log truck driver. He has 3 daughters that no longer have a father. That is what has affected every state across the country. And I've just been telling those stories repeatedly. But I'd share this with you. That first trip down there, we got to meet Sheriff Mark Daniels, your cohort down in Cochise County. And what an impressive guy. And he told us about how the wall is working. It was just south of his county. He said things are getting under control. Things are the best in our county that it's been in a long time. Now, this is June of 2020. I went back there shortly after President Biden was sworn in, and it was a few months later after that, and talked to Mark Daniels, and he was like, man, things are just out of control. And went down to Texas that had been 2021, went down to the Darien Gap, and people are just like, it is out of control. Think about that. In less than a year, with the Biden administration in charge and Mayorkas doing his dirty deeds to the American people, things went and spiraled out of control.
Wow. I mean, we saw it. I was glad that you were being a voice for it. I've watched you testify, be on committees and ask questions. I've seen you in front of the committees talking about it. I want to touch on that Darien Gap real quick because not everybody goes to the border. As a matter of fact, very few of the legislators actually go to the border. Hardly anybody goes down to the Darien Gap. My family has lived in Panama since I was in high school. I have a real affinity for that country. I don't think people understand, truly grasp how thick that jungle is in the Darien Gap and just how remote that is and how that became a distribution hub, including NGOs, actively down there, aiding and abetting in the trafficking of humans. Can you talk a little bit more about what you saw? Because I imagine the trash. I'm curious to see what you thought of it.
Yeah, so it was April 2021. We went down with Jim Jordan from the Judiciary Committee, and we went to, we were in the McAllen, Texas area. And I'll never forget a border patrol agent saying, you really need to go deeper to find out what's happening. You need to go down to Central America. And so fortunately, my chief of staff had some connections, and we went down to the Darien, so that would have been May of 2021, and we saw the NGOs starting to prop up their operation, and it is a pipeline. They bring people in through the Darien, pump them up through each country, and they end up in the United States. And we saw hundreds of people. We took these little piraguas, the little canoes, down to the most remote village down there, Bajo Chiquito, and it was being overrun at that point. It was so sad 3 years later to hear it was far worse. It was bad enough then in 2021. It was far worse in 2023 and 2024, just overrunning this poor little Indian village down in the Darien Gap.
And being run by criminals.
And NGOs, which we're finding out that they were criminals also. The United Nations, International Organization for Migration. And by the way, if there's one thing we need to do in terms of defunding groups, the International Organization for Migration should be defunded for what they did to the United States of America, because they were a critical link in the chain, as important as the cartels in Mexico in pumping people up into the United States illegally.
I am so glad you said that, because one of the I have been a very vocal person against the NGOs and the money, taxpayer dollars that has gone to funding what we have seen over the last 4 years, this immigration disaster. I want to stay on the topic of the NGOs real quick. What do you think about President Trump and how he's now taking and saying, we're not going to fund these NGOs? Is that something you like to see?
They were critical link. They are as important to defund them as it is to go after the cartels. And, people really get indignant over it. And I called out Catholic Charities a few years ago, and people got after me in regards to that. How can you go after this religious group or whatever? Well, they're taking all kinds of taxpayer money and they're funneling people into America. They're getting them signed up for the benefits. And what has happened as a result of that? I mean, when you've got what is humane about 320,000 children that the Biden-Harris administration had no idea where they were in the United States of America, many of them being human trafficked? I mean, you know better than anyone else what happens to those kids. And they were part of the link that was allowing that to happen. President Trump, I believe, is defunding them now. All these groups that were part of it, they should be defunded. And that's one of the
audited.
And audited. And it's one of the good things. I suspect many of them are getting a lot of money from USAID. It's one of the reasons why USAID should be fully defunded.
Yes. And they've also taken FEMA dollars that should have
Yes.
gone to places like North Carolina, Lahaina, Hawaii, and maybe some of them did, but we certainly had a lot less FEMA dollars to give because of the shelter and services program.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. There was money being, and I mean, there was even a couple years ago, there was money going from the VA to fund illegal immigration activities, housing them, stuff like that. I mean, we're going to continue to see that story, I believe, for years to come as these audits happen of money that went to illegal immigration. I think they were grabbing out of every pot that they could, the Biden administration, and giving it to illegal immigrants to the detriment of the American people.
I think a lot of COVID funds. I mean, we know that Washington State admitted they were giving out checks and cash and gift cards. Oh, by the way, when I brought that up and said that they were giving gift cards and plane tickets and they were giving cell phones, boy, they went out of their way, the media and the politicians, to say that I wasn't saying the truth, but we find out later on. It was but weeks later that we find out the UN had given $1.6 billion in gift cards to the illegals. And so I want to go back to what you said before. Thank goodness it's changed, right? Thanks goodness we're on a different path now. I want to talk real quickly about some of the executive orders. One of the ones that, before I get the executive orders, what do you see deportation-wise? What's your thought process on that? What do the people of Wisconsin think about that? Do you like what's going on? Do you want to see more? Where are you at on that?
Yeah, giddy up, go. We got to get this done here. And it's one of the reasons why we need to get this reconciliation bill done as soon as possible, because Tom Homan and Kristi Noem need that money to stand up the facilities to be able to hold people and then do the repatriation flights. It costs money to fly an airplane and just all the infrastructure to take these people back to their home countries. It's going to take serious money to do that, and we need to provide that money for them. And so hopefully we can get this reconciliation stuff done sooner rather than later.
Do you foresee H.R. 2 being part of that reconciliation? Do you hope to see it being part of the reconciliation?
I think it's probably going to be a separate bill.
Okay.
I think, or there's probably going to be components that will be in the reconciliation bill, but I think the full H.R. 2 is probably going to be other legislation that we'll be pushing through hopefully this session.
Another hot topic is the birthright citizenship, which I'm curious to see what you stand on it, because I have my personal feelings on it. Where are you at with that executive order on the birthright citizenship?
Yeah, it's a good executive order, and the thing we should be doing is codifying it. We should make it clear to the American people that birthright citizenship, that there is no such thing, and it was not provided for in the the 14th Amendment back in 1868. I mean, if you read that constitutional amendment and the thought behind it, the underpinnings behind it, the documents that were written justifying it, it is very clear. They did not provide for foreign nationals to be in the United States of America, have a child, and that child automatically being a citizen. That is not the case. And I got to tell you, I've just come to this in the last few months as I've really studied the documents, because I accepted the prevailing wisdom in regards to that. Well, it turns out that it is much different than what it has been portrayed. So I believe President Trump is going to win this if it wends its way through the courts. But the thing we need to do now is codify it.
Exactly. And I think that's where the disconnect has been, is where Congress and Senate have been unable to codify really good things, and over decades, not just recently, but over decades, which has left it open for the executive orders and the judicial branch to get involved in legislation.
Yeah, and we may not even actually have to codify it if it goes to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court says, hey, this is the law of the land. We are reinforcing what was in the bill, in the constitutional amendment back in 1868. I don't know how they can rule any other way. Based on the stuff that I've read, I don't know how any of the 9 justices can read it any other way.
Yeah, I'm in 100% agreement with you. And I think it's something I'm surprised wasn't challenged a long time ago,
Yeah.
or defined or codified in law different. Remain in Mexico. Do you see that? Or how do you see that?
Yeah, I think Remain in Mexico is that is going to be reinstituted. Catch and release is done, and I think the border wall is being constructed as we
They're
speak.
back
Is
on
that
it.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
They're
haven't
back.
seen any pictures, but my understanding is it's being built.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the military down there at the border?
I think it's necessary to be able to do what has to be done. I mean, this is an invasion of our country, right?
That's right.
I mean, you saw it down in Arizona. So we need to use the necessary means to make sure that this border gets secured. I mean, the carnage to the American people has just been incredible. It's time to stop, and it's time to put in place secure borders, and then have a rational immigration system that is for Americans and for America, that works for Americans. We have to have that in place here. Now is the golden moment to do it, because if we don't do it now, I'm afraid we would backslide again in the future, and we shouldn't do this again.
I think you're exactly right. And I loved what you said, because everything you said was about America and Americans. And I think Americans have been forgotten for a long time, especially with the border stuff. We're taking care of everybody else but ourselves and our own folks. And I think it's been unfair to the American people. I'm good with the military, and I'll tell you why. And because you have reports of the cartels saying they're going to authorize, they're greenlighting the use of weaponized drones against law enforcement, border patrol, local law enforcement in this country. I always explain to people, in my sheriff's office, we don't have near the armament to deal with the cartels. So I think having the military there, you don't want to find out too late. It's better to have and not need than to need and not have. And as we're trying to regain control of the border, I 100% agree that I think the military's presence there has been a strong presence.
Yeah, did I see that a rancher in the last few days ran over an IED that was planted?
We heard from a sheriff in Texas that was not correct information.
That was not, okay.
Yeah. So we had a
know.
sheriff in Texas here today, and he said that was not correct information. Okay. Where do you see Title 42? Do you think that comes back?
Boy, that's a really good question. I don't. You tell me. Do you think it should come back? Do you think that we should implement it again?
I do, because I think Title 42, for anybody listening, Title 42 was really geared towards people for health concerns, COVID. But we also have other things like tuberculosis. We have scabies. We have bubonic plague. We have all these different things that I don't think we want to reintroduce.
Yeah, and it's purely anecdotal, but I know that we've heard from some communities, especially in schools, where they're seeing these outbreaks of, whether it's measles or whatever type of communicable disease that they haven't seen in a long time. And now we can't sit here and say, yes, that's because of illegal immigration, but you can bet with them not being vaccinated, with carrying these diseases, that there's been some coming across our border.
Yeah. Now, my argument was always Title 8 should be the first law that we apply. That's the law that says you can't come into the country illegally. Yeah. But I don't think that it hurts to have something in place like Title 42. So where if somebody, we recognize that there might be a health issue there. I think. Anything else you want to cover? Boy, you've been great about.
Another thing that in H.R. 2, I wrote the parole part of the bill, because we've seen parole abused. So there's I think it's people have found out there's a lot of facets to immigration law, and but parole is something that was put in place in the 1950s, and it's meant to bring people in on a case-by-case basis. A kid in Africa that has a rare disease, and so you bring them to the Mayo Clinic or something like that until they're better, and then you let them leave the country. So the Department of Homeland Security Secretary has control over that. They can bring a person in on case-by-case basis. Mayorkas weaponized that. He brought the Afghans in, 80,000 of them on parole. You've seen them do that with the Caribbean countries, with Cuba, Venezuela, where they're bringing in 30,000 a month using parole. And it was never meant to be used that way. I think the law is clear. We tried to strengthen it in H.R. 2. I hope that's a component of what we do now as we go forward, is to strengthen that parole law and use it for what it is supposed to be, which is simply a case-by-case basis.
Excellent point. I'm glad you put that in there too, because that has been one of the major issues, not just dealing with it on the border, but actually having us bringing these folks in.
Yeah, there were about 1 million people that came in parole over the 4 years of the Biden administration, so they really abused it. We impeached Alejandro Mayorkas for a good reason.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate the Senate did not remove him.
I always thought he needed to be impeached as well. And so thank you for doing it.
Well, he deserved to be impeached. He should have been removed also by the Senate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to be cognizant of your time, and I know you have a lot of different places to be.
I got to go talk to some senators yet tonight, Mark.
Good. I did that today.
Yeah.
I think I'm about senatored and congressmaned out, but it was a pleasure having you on today. Anything else you want to say? We got an audience of sheriffs and border and immigration-minded folks out there. Anything else you want to, any parting words?
I just want to say thank you for all the work that you did down in Arizona as a sheriff. I mean, you were beloved down there and did such a terrific job, including doing some real innovative stuff in regards to policing. And thank you for all the work you did. But thank you for staying in the game here, because we need people like you. If we're going to solve this problem, we need ambassadors like you that are still in the game. And I can promise you, we're going to stay in the game.
I love it. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for the kind words. And we just can't thank you enough for all the work you're doing. And thank you, everybody, for supporting and fighting for border security and all the work you've done on that. God bless everybody. We'll catch you next time. This has been another episode of On the Border with Sheriff Lamb. Make sure if you want to donate, you can go to fairus.org, fairus.org. Donate today. That's how we keep bringing these excellent guests on and people who are really making a difference in this country. Thank you, Congressman. God bless you.
Good to be here.